Hey, I'm back today with a new series. It's all about perimenopause or premenopause. And I want to talk about this on a series of videos because it is a pretty complex subject and it is definitely worth spending some time on. Today I just want to talk about the different definitions of perimenopause. There are many definitions and you'll find that different doctors have vastly varying views of what perimenopause or premenopause is in the first place. So let's talk about some of those definitions. The Mayo Clinic on their website gives a definition of perimenopause as the natural transition to menopause or signs of progression toward menopause. And if you look into the more detailed definition there, they are really referring to just a year or two prior to total menopause. And the definition of menopause is very clear. It is after a year of not bleeding, not having a period. So there's no mystery about when menopause happens, but there is a lot of debate and disagreement about when perimenopause happens. Some people think it happens within that year, that transition year where you're losing your estrogen levels. You have no more eggs left, and so you're not going to be producing any eggs. You don't need to have a period anymore, and your body knows it, and your estrogen levels go down as a result. And that is seen as a natural process. Menopause is a very natural process. It's always been around. It's something that we've always experienced as humans, women. But perimenopause may be something that is newer on the scene, and it may be as a result of our more chemically laden environment that's full of pollution, and the way that that pollution affects our hormones could be causing more severe cases of perimenopause. Or it could also be, in addition to that, our stress levels and how stressful our lives are, especially as women who are mothers and full-time employees or business owners ourselves. We have very busy lives and way more stress. We have a lot more knowledge about what things are going on in the world, scary things all over the place, not just in our town or in our area. And the 24-hour news cycle can definitely add to our stress as well. So there are a couple possibilities, and the probability is that there are both elements that play into the severe symptoms that we find ourselves in perimenopause. So what do I mean when I'm talking about perimenopause? I am not talking about just that year or two leading up to menopause. And most integrative or functional practitioners will give a much different definition from what the Mayo Clinic has given. And my favorite definition was given by Sarah Gottfried, MD. Her definition of perimenopause is that it's the years of hormonal upheaval before your last menstrual period. So she talks about it in terms of years, and it could be a decade or more of those years. And she, instead of referring to it as an estrogen issue, refers to it as kind of a two-phase process. The beginning of perimenopause, which can start in your late 30s for some women, is all about the progesterone and progesterone going down in production in our bodies. And we don't know why that happens. It doesn't seem to be a very good process. It can cause things like excessive bleeding and fibroids, endometriosis, uterine polyps, all kinds of growths and bumps and lumps in our body. Some women have extremely dense breasts because of this. And it's thought to be a result of a waning hormonal production of progesterone. This also can account for high estrogen or estrogen dominance because progesterone is there to temper estrogen in our bodies. And if we don't have enough progesterone, we are going to appear as though we have too much estrogen, even if we have really low levels of estrogen. If estrogen isn't equaled by progesterone in our bodies, then estrogen can really wreak havoc. And some of the ways that it does that is sleeplessness, high anxiety, depression, some personality changes, social insecurity is one, and a lot of people have those physical symptoms of having fibrous growth in the uterus or in the breast. It's pretty easy to see when this is happening because our time of progesterone production and elevation is right after ovulation and just before our period. So if you have an especially emotional time during that time after ovulation and prior to your period, then you can kind of guess that you're low in progesterone without even doing any testing. Now, of course, I recommend working with a doctor over this, but it's hard to find a doctor that knows a lot about these progesterone and estrogen levels and trends. And there are only a few specialists, even here in the US, where most of the work is being done on this. So I would recommend reading books. Like I said, Sarah Gottfried has amazing books on the subject. My favorite book on the subject was the one that I found when I was in the really early stages of unaddressed perimenopause in my late 30s and early 40s. And it's a really dense book written by another medical doctor, John Lee. It's called What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Premenopause. I just happened to find this book right when I was starting to struggle with the emotional ups and downs of low progesterone. And I was having also some uterine polyps and heavy bleeding. And I was really, really frightened by these symptoms. And I couldn't find answers, couldn't find doctors that knew what was going on with my body. I was really frightened, and this book gave me so much comfort and solace. And the real bottom line in this book is that when you have some of these scary symptoms, the best thing to try is natural progesterone. So not synthetic progestins, not the kind that's prescribed by doctors, but progesterone that comes from plant sources naturally. And I did that under the guidance of a very wise and experienced doctor, and that solved my problem. So I am very, very happy that I found this book and the doctors that I found at that time in my late 30s and early 40s when I really needed it. I also started watching my breast for breast cancer, and I'm guessing that's the time when breast cancer was forming in my body 10 years ago. So I was dealing with a lot of fibrous growth in my body and potentially cancer at that time. So because cancer is a possibility for us and our fragile hormones, and our relationship with estrogen is still so unclear in many ways, it is really essential that you work with a doctor around these issues. I definitely would never have taken any synthetic estrogens or progestins on my journey toward balancing my hormones, even in perimenopause, because I know how dangerous those two can be. But I am a big advocate for natural progesterone and even a little bit of natural estrogen in some cases. But I definitely would like for you to find a doctor that is way more experienced than I am in these things. And so I think it's worth the search. I will definitely list some of my recommended favorite doctors below, ones that are still practicing and who know what they're talking about in this. And I'll probably list some podcast episodes and articles by them as well. I just want to talk about one other thing as I'm defining perimenopause, and that is something that I'll define a little bit more in coming videos, but I want to talk about where our sex hormones come from. So they start out as cholesterol, as the basic raw material that hormones are made out of, and the next step on the journey is that they are made into pregnenolone, which is kind of the mother of all sex hormones. And progesterone, cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen all come down, and I'll show you a chart here, from pregnenolone as their source. And there's a theory that hasn't been fully proven yet, but there's a theory that cortisol and our stress levels, our high stress levels these days, really takes away from those raw materials of pregnenolone and makes it a competition for those raw materials. So the theory is that the higher the stress in our lives, the more we need cortisol to manage that stress and inflammation. And the more we use cortisol, the less we can produce progesterone and estrogen. So we end up with very, very low levels of both. Now, it doesn't matter how low your estrogen is. If your progesterone is lower than your estrogen, then you're going to have estrogen dominant symptoms. I'll talk more about this cascade of the production of our hormones in future videos, but I just wanted to mention it here, kind of as an explanation for how stress might be to blame for our perimenopausal journey symptoms. And I can say that my stress management practices have been the most influential factor in my own journey away from the symptoms of perimenopause. those really scary emotional symptoms and heavy bleeding and fibrous growths in the body symptoms. I really changed my habits, especially in the evening, very suddenly after reading this book about premenopause. I decided that I needed a drastic change, and I slowed myself down. I used to be a type A active person that never sat down, let alone lied down or took a nap or read a book. I was always on the go, and I was always being productive. And at that stage in my life, when I learned about perimenopause and stress and cortisol and the production of estrogen and progesterone, I made a vow to myself that I was going to slow down and spend my evenings in a more restful way. And I've done that for the last 10 years. And I do believe that is the most influential factor. You might need a little bit of progesterone short term, but what you really need long term, and what I recommend more than anything else, is stress management. And I'll talk about that in coming videos. Thanks for tuning in today, and I will see you in upcoming videos on the subject of perimenopause or premenopause. See you then.